Clara lost everything in an instant. The man she loved, the home where she dreamed of raising her daughter, and the security she thought was eternal. Pregnant, alone, and with nowhere to go, she took the only job available, caring for a child who, like her, carried wounds too deep for his age. What Clara couldn't have imagined was that by stepping into that cold mansion, she would not only nurture a wounded boy, but also awaken the heart of a man who had buried all hope of love. Please leave a like, comment below, subscribe to the channel, and share with anyone who loves a good story of redemption and new beginnings. Now, let's get to the story. A quiet life, a sudden end. The morning began with the smell of warm bread and the metallic sound of a key turning in the workshop lock. It was Saturday, and Noah usually woke up before dawn to organize his tools while the neighborhood was still asleep. Clara loved to watch from the kitchen window, his silhouette walking across the yard, his wrinkled gray shirt, his steps determined, his body still young, shaped by hard work. She would smile to herself, with a cup of tea in her hands and one hand resting on her belly, which was now slightly rounded. They had been together for 6 years, and in that rented house at the end of a dead-end street, with a low wall and an ivy fence, Clara believed they had found that kind of peace you don't see in soap operas, the kind that is built with simple routines, inside jokes, afternoons fixing bicycles, and a love that was unspoken but real. That morning, she put on one of his shirts, big with his scent, and came down barefoot, her hair in a messy bun. She made breakfast as always, 2 toasted breads with butter, chocolate milk, and a small vitamin drink she had learned to make since she found out she was pregnant. She still surprised herself saying "pregnant" under her breath, like someone trying on a new shoe. It was strange and magical at the same time, even more so after everyone thought she couldn't have children. Noah came into the kitchen with grease-stained hands and a smile on his lips. "Did you make that vitamin drink again?" he asked, leaning in to kiss her neck. "Yes, and before you complain, it has carrot and banana. The baby's going to be born strong, just like its dad," she replied, with the smile she only used for him, "and with a lot of hair, just like you," he joked, gently touching her belly. In that simple gesture, there was a world. Clara didn't know it, but that would be their last breakfast together. Afterward, she washed the dishes, while he changed the oil on a client's car. The workshop radio played an old song, and she hummed softly, feeling the baby move for the first time, an almost imperceptible flutter that made her stop in front of the sink, her eyes welling with tears. Because of that, she didn't hear the call. Nor did she see when Noah rushed out, called by his brother to help with a broken-down car on the road. He left a hurried note on the fridge, "Back soon. Don't lift heavy things. I love you." Clara found the note 2 hours later, when she noticed the absence of the drill sound and the smell of grease in the air. She spent the rest of the afternoon feeling uneasy, as if something in her skin told her that the world was too silent. The phone rang at 5:43, and from that moment on, she was never the same again. The voice on the other end belonged to a strange man, too formal for that time of day. He asked for her full name, confirmed if she was Noah's wife. When she said yes, a pause swallowed the air between them. And then, the sentence came, without anesthetic. "Your husband was in an accident. He didn't survive." The kitchen floor disappeared from under her feet. She let herself fall into a chair, staring blankly into space. No sound came out. There was no scream or immediate cry. There was silence, a silence that hurt like a knife through the chest. The man said more things, but she didn't hear. Her body shut down to protect her mind. Everything became an echo. Only one sentence repeated itself, like a needle scratching a record. He didn't survive. Noah, the man who fixed things. The man who danced with her in the living room even without music. The man who held her trembling hand when the pregnancy test was positive. Now he was a lifeless body, a name on a hospital chart, a file number. She was only able to get up hours later, guided by an almost irrational need to get dressed and go to the hospital. She didn't remember how she got there. She didn't know if she took the bus, if she called someone. She only remembered the white hallway, the smell of antiseptic, and the compassionate look of the nurse. Noah was lying there, clean, with a sheet covering him up to his chest. She didn't cry. She just touched his face with her fingertips, like someone trying to wake a person from a very deep sleep. "My love," she whispered. And then she cried. Not with noise, but with that kind of crying that comes from the eyes and the throat at the same time. A muffled sob that tears without a scream. She put her hand on her belly and felt the baby move again. Not now. Not like this. Days later, the papers started arriving. Fines, debts, the workshop car, which was still in the name of the previous owner. The house, which would be claimed by the landlord because Noah didn't have life insurance. Nothing was in order. The truth was, they lived with little, but they were happy, and maybe because of that, they never worried about what could happen. Now, it happened. Clara was forced to leave the house a week after the funeral. She packed her clothes in garbage bags. She threw away his toothbrush, but couldn't bring herself to part with his grease-stained shirt. She took only one suitcase with clothes, a folder with her prenatal records, and the desperate hope that someone would take her in. Her older sister Denise agreed to take her in for a while, but she made it clear from the beginning that it was out of charity. Her brother-in-law, Mike, didn't hide his discomfort at having a pregnant woman sleeping on the living room couch. Clara tried not to cry in front of them. She would wait until everyone was asleep to lock herself in the bathroom and bite a towel. She would cry until she fell asleep. She would wake up before dawn to look for job postings. She called families, sent messages offering work as a nanny. No one wanted a 3-month pregnant woman with no recent experience and no references. Her belly was starting to grow, and with it, the urgency, the rage, the helplessness. She no longer felt hungry. Her body worked by inertia. All she wanted was to go back in time. Just that. 10 minutes. If she could have stopped him, grabbed his arm, invented any excuse, maybe he would still be there, standing, smelling of grease and with eyes like the sun. But time doesn't bend for those who need it. It just moves forward, indifferent. On that gray Tuesday morning, Clara left early for another interview, perhaps the 10th of the week. She walked to the bus stop with an old coat tight over her belly and a heart too heavy to carry in her chest. Deep down, she knew it wouldn't work out, but she had to try. Because inside her, a life was growing, and out there, everything was falling apart. She still didn't know that life sometimes begins at the exact moment when everything seems to have ended. What do you think Clara will do? How will she survive? Tell us your thoughts below. The silent mansion. Clara clutched the handle of her purse, as if it were the only anchor between her and a world that insisted on moving on without her. The sidewalks were wet from the early morning drizzle, and her every step seemed to make more noise than necessary, as if the whole city could hear her hunger, her exhaustion, her exposed failure. The bus stop was almost empty. An old man was asleep with his chin resting on his chest, and a woman in a cleaning uniform chewed gum, her gaze lost. Clara kept her eyes down. She had learned to hide inside her own body. Her every movement was small, as if apologizing to the air for existing were part of her breathing. She arrived at the interview address at 9, a simple house with an old gate that creaked open. She knocked twice and waited. A boy opened the door. He couldn't have been more than 10, with eyes too tired for his age. He called his mother, who appeared from the hallway in an apron stained with sauce. "Are you the girl for the interview?" "Yes, Clara," she replied, trying to smile. The woman's gaze swept over her belly, then her hands, as if evaluating a piece of meat. She gestured for her to come in. She quickly explained that she needed someone to take care of the boy, but that the condition was clear. She had to be agile, with no excuses, and willing to stay late. "I don't want any problems, okay? I already had one who was always asking for days off, faking nausea. A pregnant woman is no good to me if she's going to be a bother," she said in a dry, almost accusatory tone. Clara nodded, although her blood was boiling under her skin. She knew no one wanted to hire a pregnant woman. She knew every interview would be a humiliation disguised as an opportunity. But she had to try. Not for herself, for the child she carried inside, who already deserved more than scraps. They dismissed her 15 minutes later with a "we'll call you," which was a death sentence. She returned to the street feeling the weight of the days on her back. Her stomach rumbled, but she no longer thought about eating. She thought about Denise's overdue rent. She thought about Mike's sneering glances when she came home empty-handed. She thought about how the living room couch hurt her back, and how her presence always seemed to be a bother. It was like living in a place where everything was temporary. The roof, the affection, her very existence. That night, Mike came home drunk. He threw his keys on the table, laughed loudly, and cursed. Denise tried not to argue, as always. Clara was at the end of the sofa, her feet covered by an old blanket, trying to read job group messages on her phone. She pretended not to hear when he walked behind her and let out a comment too low to ignore. "So, did you find some idiot to support that baby for you yet?" Denise's eyes widened in surprise, but she said nothing. Clara closed her phone and got up slowly. She didn't respond. She didn't cry. She went up the stairs to the bathroom and locked the door. She sat on the toilet lid and took a deep breath until her chest stopped hurting. She looked at her reflection in the mirror. Pale skin, deep dark circles, a distant look. Inside, she felt like she was fading, like a candle almost at its end. 2 days later, she found an ad on a classified site, a nanny position in an elegant neighborhood in the city. It didn't say much, just caregiver needed urgently. Experience with children is valued, but the most important thing is patience and sensitivity. Above average salary, live-in position, in-person interviews. Address, Cedar Street 798. Ask for Eleanor. The name seemed to come from a romance novel, but the offer was real, and Clara had no more options. She arrived at the place in the most presentable clothes she owned. The navy blue dress she had worn to her nephew's baptism, now a little tight because of her belly, and the same worn coat as always. The street was lined with tall trees and ivy-covered walls. Everything seemed too silent. Not the calm of the countryside, but that kind of silence that carries power and distance. The mansion in question was gray, modern, almost cold. An automatic gate opened slowly, and Clara entered, feeling out of place. The garden was perfectly manicured. The entrance smelled of expensive flowers. A man in a suit led her inside the house without saying a word. In the living room, a woman with platinum blonde hair, an impeccable posture, and a sharp gaze was waiting for her. She was wearing a beige set and holding a thin folder in her hands. "Clara, right? You can sit." The interview was brief. Eleanor spoke with precision, like someone who doesn't like to waste time. She explained that the position was to take care of a 4-year-old boy. A boy. Too quiet. His mother had passed away recently. The father, a busy businessman, was almost never home. They needed someone patient, discreet, who knew how to handle silences. "He doesn't talk," she said, crossing her legs. "At least not since she died. We've had a lot of nannies pass through here. Some wanted to turn everything into therapy. Others felt too much pity. We don't want pity. We want functionality." Clara hesitated. She wanted to ask more, but held herself back. She felt watched all the time. Eleanor analyzed her every gesture with trained eyes. "You're pregnant, aren't you?" she asked bluntly. 3.5 months, Clara replied, keeping her voice firm. "The baby's father? He passed away recently." "It was an accident." The woman just nodded, as if filling out a mental form. Then she got up, went to a side door, and called someone. "Julian wants to see her personally. He's the one who decides." Clara felt her heart race. She didn't expect to be evaluated directly by the boss, especially not in that house where everything seemed carefully devoid of emotion. She was led to a large desk, walls lined with books, an unlit fireplace, leather armchairs, and, behind the desk, a man with a serious gaze and a rigid posture. Tall, dark-haired, with a chiseled jaw. He didn't look tired. He looked exhausted in a way that goes beyond the body. He didn't smile. He didn't offer his hand. He just looked at her, for a few seconds that felt like an eternity. "Have you taken care of children before?" "Yes, and I took care of my grandmother for many years," she replied, trying to sound confident. "Do you know how to handle trauma? Pain?" The question cut her like a knife. She thought about Noah, about the baby who would never hear its father's voice, about Mike's looks, about the nights crying in the bathroom. "I think only someone who has truly felt pain can see it in others," she replied. Her voice came out low but firm. Julian watched her for a few more seconds. Then he said something to Eleanor in a low voice, and then he said, "You start tomorrow." She still didn't know the boy's name, nor did she know that this job would be more than just a job. But in that moment, only one thing mattered. She wasn't falling anymore. Now, though she didn't know it, she was starting to climb. Even if it was by the sharp edges of pain. What do you think will happen when Clara meets the boy? Will she be able to help him? Tell us your thoughts below. A quiet connection. Clara woke up before the sun rose. The room where she slept at her sister's house seemed even colder that morning, as if the air knew she was about to leave. She showered without hurrying, put on the same black, sturdy pants and white shirt she had received from a former employer, and pulled her hair into a tight bun, trying to hide the fragility of the strands. She took a deep breath as she left, with her backpack on her back and a knot in her stomach that wasn't just pregnancy. It was fear. It was doubt. It was everything she couldn't allow herself to feel at that moment. She arrived at the mansion's gate 20 minutes early. The same imposing feel of the first visit seemed even more severe in the morning light. She was greeted by a uniformed woman who introduced herself as Clarice, the housekeeper. She had small, attentive eyes and a tone of voice that seemed to measure every syllable before she spoke it. "The staff room is in the back. You can leave your things there. The boy wakes up around 8. Mr. Julian usually leaves early, so you shouldn't run into him often," she said, without looking her directly in the eye, as if speaking to someone who didn't need to be reminded that she was invisible. The room was small, clean, with a single bed and an empty dresser. Clara left her backpack on the floor and ran her hands over the bedspread, feeling for the first time in weeks the presence of a space that, although temporary, was hers alone. The silence of the house was absolute, heavy, as if time inside had stopped. Clarice returned minutes later with quick instructions, schedules, restrictions, places where she shouldn't go. Finally, she said, "He's in his room. You can go up, but go slowly. He doesn't like strangers." Clara nodded and followed the hallway to a light marble staircase. She went up slowly, her footsteps sinking into the thick carpet until she stopped in front of a half-open door. She took a deep breath before gently pushing it open. The room was large, decorated in soft shades of blue and gray. There were toys neatly arranged on shelves, a fabric teepee in a corner, and a large rug with star patterns. But what was most striking was the silence. In the center of the room, sitting by the window, was the boy. Leo was small, thin, with dark hair falling over his forehead. He was wearing striped pajamas, and his gaze was fixed on a point in the garden. He didn't turn his face when she entered, nor did he move. He was like a painting, alive, but trapped in a world that Clara couldn't reach yet. She approached slowly, sitting on the floor at a certain distance. "Hello, Leo. I'm Clara. I'm here to take care of you and to play, if you want." No response, not even a look. He remained motionless, his fingers moving in an almost imperceptible rhythm on a small blue toy car he held in his lap. Clara didn't press him. She took one of the books from the shelf and began to read softly. The story was simple, about a fox looking for a safe place to sleep. She read slowly, without looking at, as if she were just telling the story to herself. When she finished, she was silent, waiting for some sign. But Leo was still the same, still absent. She came back the next day, and the day after, and the day after that, without rushing. Each day, she sat in the same place, read stories, arranged toys around him, and sang softly while tidying up the books. She didn't talk to him like he was sick, nor did she pretend his silence didn't exist. She was just there. It was a cloudy Wednesday when something changed. As she read the story of the fox for the third time, she felt a gaze on her. She kept reading, but her heart was racing. When she finished, she slowly lowered the book and looked at him. Leo was watching her. Not with fear, not with anger, but with that fragile curiosity of someone who wants to come out of their shell but doesn't know how. "Do you like the fox?" she asked. He didn't respond, but he looked down and pressed the toy car against his chest. It was the first gesture. That night, while she was tidying up the small kitchen in the back, Clara heard footsteps in the hallway. It was Clarice. "He watched you today. That hasn't happened in a long time," she said, almost as a warning. Clara just nodded. She preferred not to turn something so subtle into a victory, but inside her, a spark ignited. On the fifth day, Leo came closer, slowly, without looking directly at her. He sat 2 steps away while she put together a puzzle of animals. They stayed there for half an hour, in silence, but together. And when she got up to put the pieces away, he didn't run off. He just watched, like someone who was starting to recognize the sound of his own footsteps inside the house. Clara began to notice the patterns. The boy didn't like sudden movements. He avoided mirrors. He seemed to panic at loud voices. And above all, he reacted when he heard his mother's name, which Clarice, ever so stern, said was normal for his age. But Clara knew. That was trauma. It was loss. It was abandonment. Julian, for his part, was nowhere to be seen. He was a suited ghost who crossed the hall early in the morning and disappeared in silence. He never greeted her. He never asked about his son. But once in the late afternoon, when she came down with Leo in her arms after a nap in the garden, she felt a gaze on them. It was him. Standing at the top of the stairs, his shirt sleeves rolled up, his face tense. Julian's eyes were fixed on Leo, who was sleeping peacefully. Then on Clara. And then he turned away without saying anything. Clara understood. He was watching. Always. But from a distance. Like someone who is afraid to touch something that could fall apart with the slightest touch. In the days that followed, Leo began to show small changes. He pointed to toys. He touched her arm when he wanted something. He held her fingers during short walks in the garden. Clara didn't rush anything. She offered. She waited. She backed off if necessary. It wasn't about making the boy talk. It was about making him feel safe again. In the third week, while she was washing his hands in the bathroom, something odd happened. Leo looked up, saw himself in the mirror, then looked at her and held out his arms. A simple gesture. But for someone who didn't touch anyone, it was almost a cry. She lifted him carefully, and he rested his head on her shoulder. They stayed like that for several minutes. It was Clarice who saw them, standing in the doorway, with a handkerchief in her hands. That night, Clara returned to her room, sat on the bed, and cried softly. It wasn't sadness. It was something else. Something she didn't even know how to name. Maybe hope. Maybe love. Or maybe the first feeling of belonging since she had buried Noah. She still slept poorly. She still had nightmares. She still woke up with her hand on her belly, asking the universe how she would raise a child with nothing. But for the first time, there was a routine. There was a face waiting for her every morning. There was a child who, although he didn't speak, was starting to listen to her with his eyes. And there was a man, too lonely to admit it, who was starting, even if he didn't want to notice her presence. Not with desire, not with haste, but with that kind of silent attention that is born in someone who has also been broken and recognizes the same fragments in others. How do you think Julian will react to Clara's growing bond with Leo? Will he open up? Comment your thoughts below. The weight of a secret. He watched more than he let on. Julian never approached her directly, but his presence was like a discreet shadow in the hallways, a reflection in the glass of the gallery, a half-open door at the end of the day. Sometimes, Clara could feel him standing at the top of the stairs while she told stories to Leo in the living room. Other times, she would catch his unmoving silhouette in front of his office window when she took the boy to the garden. Always at a distance, always in silence. Leo, on the other hand, was flourishing. In a shy, fragmented way, like a plant that leans toward the sun for the first time after a storm that was too long. He no longer pulled away from her touch. He accepted food more easily. There were days when he would sit on her lap of his own accord. He never said a word, but his eyes sought hers when he woke up from a nightmare, and his small hands grabbed hers tightly when the wind made the trees outside creak. The connection between them was made of silence, but not of absence. It was an invisible, but living exchange. Something that grew a little more each day. And although Clara knew she shouldn't get attached, something inside her, maybe instinct, maybe loneliness, had already chosen to love that child. The following Wednesday, Clara ran into Julian in the hallway. It wasn't a planned encounter. He was coming down the stairs slowly, his tie half loosened, and she was going up with Leo holding her hand. The boy stopped when he saw him, not out of fear, but with the kind of doubt of someone who doesn't know if they are allowed to run into their father's arms. Julian stopped. "Is he eating well?" he asked, without looking directly at her. Clara nodded. Better than before. There are still days when he rejects everything, but we're making progress. He watched his son for a few seconds, then looked at her. His expression was tense, as if he had something stuck between his teeth. "He still doesn't talk." The phrase came out dry, almost like an accusation. Clara felt her chest burn, but she replied calmly. "Every child has their own time. The trauma was great, and he's starting to trust. That's already a lot." "I don't pay for a lot. I pay for results," he retorted. Harsher than necessary. That's when the first friction happened. Clara looked at him without looking away. The tone she used was firm, but without losing her dignity. I'm not a therapist, nor do I work miracles. I'm a woman who is trying to take care of her son as best she can. If that's not enough, maybe you should look for someone else." The silence that followed was thick. Leo gently pulled on her shirt sleeve, looking for comfort. Julian looked away. When he spoke again, his voice was low. "Continue what you are doing. I just want him to be okay." He turned around and left, leaving in the air a strange mix of wounded pride and a silent admission. Clara took a deep breath, squeezed Leo's hand, and continued up the stairs. That night, as she tucked the boy into bed, he did something he had never done before. He pulled on her pillow to bring her closer, as if he wanted her to stay. Clara sat on the side of the bed and began to sing an old song, one that her grandmother used to hum in the late afternoon. The room filled with that low sound, rocking Leo between sleep and comfort. Hours later, she was still awake in her room. She was thinking about the argument with Julian, not because of the confrontation itself, but because of the way he had looked at her, not with contempt, like Mike, nor with pity, like Eleanor sometimes let slip, but with rage. A rage that seemed directed at himself, as if she, with her serene presence, was messing up a carefully constructed internal system. In the days that followed, he started crossing paths with her more often. It wasn't intentional, or maybe it was. Sometimes he would come home earlier. Other times, he would show up by surprise in the living room, where she was reading with Leo. He would watch in silence and then leave without saying anything. But something in his eyes had changed. Less distant, more restless. One afternoon, in a moment of distraction, Clara found a fallen photo frame behind a bookshelf. It was an old photo. Julian and a young, pretty woman with light brown hair and a sweet smile. Beside them, Leo as a baby, in her arms. The frame was broken. She picked it up, cleaned the glass, and placed it back on the sideboard. That same day, Julian called her into his office. "You handle things in the house without permission." The phrase was icy, but his eyes didn't match the stiffness of his voice. Clara swallowed. "The frame was fallen. I thought it was important. My apologies." Julian looked at the photo. For a second, his face softened. Just for a second. It was. He turned to the window and was silent for a time that felt like a whole winter. When he spoke again, his voice sounded strangely tired. "She died here, you know, on the stairs. She was in a hurry, running to answer her cell phone. She had a call from the hospital, a study. She slipped, hit her head. She never woke up." Clara felt her body go cold. She didn't say anything. She just stayed there, listening. "I was in a meeting, 40 minutes away. She called before. I hung up. I sent her a message afterward. She never answered it." He ran a hand over his face and laughed, a dry, humorless laugh. "Everyone talks about the child's grief, the boy's pain. But no one talks about what it's like to live with guilt. That kind of guilt that not even time erases. It just accumulates and drains you." Rains. Clara felt like touching him, to tell him he wasn't alone. But she knew it was too soon. Instead, she said what she could. "Leo is still here, and he needs you, not the businessman. The father." Julian didn't respond, but that night, he stayed in the house longer than usual. And as he passed Clara in the hallway, he murmured, "Thank you for taking care of him." It wasn't a change. It wasn't an apology. But it was something. A beginning, perhaps. Fragile, unstable, uncomfortable. Like almost every true feeling. Clara returned to her room with her soul in a whirlwind. She no longer knew where her role as an employee ended and where something deeper, more dense, began. An unexpected, tenuous bond, but impossible to ignore. Because, sometimes, the most real bonds are not born of promises, but of shared silences, of recognized pains, and of looks that, although brief, say everything that the mouth doesn't yet dare to say. What do you think Julian's wife's death was really about? Did she have an affair, or was it something else? Leave your thoughts below. A quiet confession, Leo started running through the hallways of the house with the freedom of someone who, finally, felt at home. He laughed loudly, stumbled, and called for Clara with the naturalness of someone who already saw her as part of himself. He didn't say much, but the little he said was valuable. He no longer avoided mirrors. His fingers no longer trembled at touch. He slept hugging the blanket Clara had sewn with old scraps, and he would dream aloud. He would call her name. Julian, for the first time, did not run from the scene. He watched. He participated, although he wasn't sure how. Clara noticed that he was starting to come home from work earlier. Sometimes, he would bring books to read in the living room while she played with the boy. Other times, he would just sit there, with an untouched glass of wine, listening to their laughter. On some days, they would cross paths in the hallway, and their shoulders would brush, not by accident, but from a closeness they no longer knew how to avoid. It was as if the space between them was shrinking without anyone saying it out loud. She pretended not to notice it, but she felt it, and what she felt confused her. Julian's gaze was no longer that of the boss, nor that of the man locked in his own pain. It was different, more attentive, more alive. One night, she found him in the kitchen, alone, finishing setting the table. Clarice had gone home early. Leo was already asleep. He offered her a cup of tea. Silence. Only the sound of the kettle in the background. "Do you like jasmine?" he asked. "Yes, it gives a sense of home." He smiled. The first time she saw him smile completely. "I thought this house would never have a scent again," he said. "Since Maria." The phrase hung in the air. He didn't finish it. She didn't press. She just sat down at the table, and they both drank in silence. A different kind of silence, not the kind that suffocates, but the kind that holds. It was there that the touch came. Soft. His fingers, almost without meaning to, touched hers on the table. She didn't pull away, but she didn't respond either. They stayed there, still, breathing together. That morning, Clara didn't sleep. She felt like she was betraying something she didn't even know how to name. It wasn't guilt. It was fear. Fear of what that could mean. Julian wasn't just any man, and she was no longer the same woman. Now there was Leo. There was Lily, growing inside her. There was the pain for Noah, still alive in some corner of her chest. But there was also that stubborn desire to stay, to give in. 2 days later, the tension broke. It was a Sunday, at dusk. Clara was in the garden with Leo, trying to teach him how to draw butterflies. He was scribbling, serious, focused, and every now and then he would look at her, as if seeking her approval. Julian appeared out of nowhere. He was carrying 2 ice creams, one for Leo, one for her. "I thought the day deserved a sweet ending," he said, handing her the ice cream without looking her directly in the eye. Clara smiled, surprised. She took the ice cream. The heat was making the treat melt quickly. When their hands touched, she didn't expect him not to let go. "Clara," he said, his voice lower than usual. "I need to tell you something." She stopped. "Not now," she replied. "But if I don't say it, then just hold on to it. Because if you say it, maybe I can't keep pretending anymore." He looked at her for a long time, like someone trying to decipher what was behind the control. She looked away, took Leo's hand, and went inside. Later that night, after putting Leo to bed, she found Julian in the gallery. He was standing with his back to her, his hands in his pockets, his shirt sleeves rolled up. The breeze moved the curtains. It was a lonely image, but not cold. She approached him without making a sound. "I'm not a replacement for anyone," she said. With firmness, he turned around. He seemed to have been expecting that. "I know, and I'm not going to let myself be loved just to fill a void." Julian nodded, but his eyes no longer showed denial, just a genuine fear. "That's not it," he murmured. You're different. I see you, not as a shadow, as a presence." The silence that followed was pure electrical tension. She took another step. "Then why do you pull away every time I get close?" "Because I don't know what to do with what I feel," he replied. "Because loving again isn't easy. Loving you, it disarms me." Clara closed her eyes for an instant, and then, without warning, she kissed him. It wasn't a desperate kiss, or an impulsive one. It was calm, deep, as if saying, "I'm scared too, but I'm here." He responded, his hands on her shoulders, his body still unsure but surrendered. And then, when the kiss ended, he whispered, "I'm not ready yet." Clara pulled away. She looked him in the eyes with something that wasn't anger. It was resolve. "I am." She turned, not with drama, but with dignity. The next morning, her things were gone from the room. There was only a note on the dresser. Love is only worth it if it doesn't need to be hidden or postponed. Clarice said nothing. She just cleaned the empty space with her eyes full of tears. Leo asked for her 3 times that day, and then he didn't ask any more. But at the end of the afternoon, when he drew, he made 3 figures: him, Clara, and a round belly. Above the paper he wrote, as best he could, in his shaky handwriting, "My house." Leo's voice resonated inside Clara like a silent thunder. "Mama." He didn't say anything after that, but he didn't need to. That gesture, so small and so immense at the same time, had opened a new door between them, one that was no longer possible to close. In the days that followed, Julian seemed more contained, not colder, not more absent, but filled with a stillness that bordered on discomfort. His eyes could no longer avoid Clara's, and when they did, they held something tense, undefined, like someone who knows that something inside has changed, but still doesn't have the courage to name it. She also felt that tension in the air, growing denser every day. It was like walking through a dark room where every step could set off a trigger. Leo, on the other hand, was in the midst of a complete transformation. He said few words, almost always in whispers, but he was starting to express himself. He pointed with more firmness, sought Julian with his eyes, and whispered yes and no with a clarity that came from affection. And, even more movingly, he called Clara Mama, with a frequency that burned in her chest in a way she couldn't explain. It was beautiful. It was cruel. It was a love that grew on the unstable ground of loss. One gray afternoon, while Clara was tidying up Leo's toys, she found a torn envelope inside a forgotten cardboard box at the back of the closet. It was a crumpled newspaper clipping. She thought about throwing it away, but something, perhaps the headline printed in huge letters, perhaps the instinct she had learned to listen to over time, stopped her. At the top of the page it read, "Businessman's wife embroiled in controversy with partner dies in domestic accident." Her heart sank. She recognized the image of the woman in the photo. It was Leo's mother, smiling with an expression that now, in that context, seemed tragic. She read the text. The note made insinuations that the death occurred after a marital argument, that there were compromising messages between the deceased and her husband's partner, a man named Robert Taylor. No direct accusation, just those ambiguous and poisonous words that the press knows how to spread so well. In the end, it mentioned that the case had been silenced by the influence of the husband, without further clarification. Clara was paralyzed for a few minutes. This rewrote everything. The woman's death had not just been an accident. There was something behind it, a weight that Julian had been carrying without ever naming it. And that, perhaps, had destroyed more than his marriage. She went down the stairs slowly, the folded newspaper in her hands. She found Julian in the back gallery, with a forgotten glass of wine on the table. He was looking out at the garden, but he seemed to be seeing something else, a place that no longer existed. Clara approached him in silence and laid the clipping in front of him. He didn't move for a long time. Then, he simply took a deep breath and said, "You shouldn't have seen that." "But I did," she replied, with firmness. "And now I can't stop thinking about it. Was it true? The thing about the partner?" Julian gripped the glass tightly. His tense jaw revealed the effort to remain in control. "Robert was my best friend from college. He was with me when we founded the company. I was in the office next door when I got the call from the hospital." He took a long pause. "I always knew something had changed between them. Maria started to close herself off, to go out alone, to have breakdowns. When I confronted her, she denied it. She said she was tired, that she needed space." "And you believed her?" Clara asked softly. "I chose to believe her, to pretend. It was easier than facing the truth." Julian finally looked at her. "Until one day, I found the messages. She swore it was just a misunderstanding, that Robert had made a pass at her, and she didn't know how to reject him. She said she would end everything, that she still loved me. But I couldn't. I didn't know how to handle it." He got up, walked a few steps on the wooden deck, his shoulders tense. "She fell 2 days later. I didn't talk to her during that time. We didn't sleep together. I slept in the office. And the morning of the accident, she called me. She wanted to talk. I didn't answer. I was with Robert. I chose to ignore her. And then? Then she died. And the only thing left was this stain, this doubt. If I had answered, if I had gone back home, if I had forgiven her, maybe she would still be alive." The silence that followed was bitter. Clara approached him slowly. There were tears in his eyes, but they were not new. They were old, stuck, hard. She didn't try to comfort him. She just said what she could. "Leo is still here, and he needs more than an absent father. He needs to know that he is not responsible for other people's pain." Julian nodded, with a sadness in his gaze that seemed to come from every gesture. "Do you think I'm guilty?" he asked, and for the first time there was genuine vulnerability in his voice, not pride. Clara hesitated for a moment, but she was honest. "I think you punished yourself for too long. And what if you want to do something for her? It's time to love the son she left behind. Not out of guilt, but for him." He looked at her, and there was that same gaze that disarmed her, intense, confused, grateful, and painful. A look that carried everything he still didn't know how to say. Clara looked away, not because she didn't want to face him, but because she felt that if she maintained eye contact, something inside her would give in. She didn't know if she could carry the weight of that story as well. She already had her own rubble. But at the same time, something inside her, perhaps that ancient instinct of someone who always took care of others more than herself, wanted to stay. That night, she had a hard time sleeping. She thought about Julian, about the kind of pain that hardens a man until he is almost inaccessible. She thought about Leo, about his attentive eyes, about the affection that was growing between them, like a stubborn plant in cracked soil. She thought about Noah and about how life was made of layers that you don't choose. When she finally closed her eyes, her body was exhausted. But her soul, that was in conflict. Because now, she knew too much. And because her heart, against all logic, was already too attached to that house, to that child, and to that broken man. She knew the road ahead would be harder than she imagined. But she also knew that open wounds only heal when they stop being hidden. And sometimes, only love is courageous enough to touch them. But not everyone wants to be healed. Not everyone is ready to be touched. What do you think will happen now that Clara knows the truth? Will she stay, or will she choose to move on? Tell us your thoughts below. An unforgettable kiss and a sudden departure. It was a suffocating summer night, with the house silent and Leo already asleep, when Julian came looking for her. Clara was in the kitchen, washing a forgotten cup, lost in the back and forth of the suds, when she felt his presence behind her. It wasn't the first shared silence between them, but there was something different about this instant, a heavier weight, as if the air was pregnant with something unnamed. "I need to talk to you," he said, his voice low, hoarse. "Des, ne bist entunt." She turned slowly, drying her hands on the hem of her blouse. "I'm listening." Julian took a deep breath, ran a hand through his hair, and walked to stand a few feet from her. His dark eyes were clouded with something contained, perhaps doubt, perhaps fear, perhaps desire repressed for too long. "I don't know when this started. Maybe it was the way you hold Leo, or how you talk to him. Maybe it was when you stayed in that room after the rain, or when you told me things no one else dared to say. But I feel something." He took a step forward. "And that scares me more than death." Clara felt her entire body vibrate with those words. She wanted to respond, but he didn't let her. He continued, as if he needed to vomit it out before pride stopped him. "I buried a woman I loved. Then I buried the part of me that knew how to love. I thought that living the rest of my life without that was a fair price for everything that happened. But now..." He stopped in front of her. "Now there's you. You and that quiet chaos. And I don't know what to do." She stared at him, feeling her breath catch in her chest. She didn't know whether to run or to move forward. But she didn't have time to decide. He kissed her. It wasn't a soft kiss. It wasn't light. It was desperate. It was confusing. It was the kiss of someone lost, who for a second finds refuge. His hands held her face with urgency, as if he needed to cling to something he didn't yet understand. And Clara, for a moment, responded. For an instant, she forgot that she was there as a nanny, as a temporary guest. For an instant, she forgot the night sleeping on her sister's couch, Mike's looks, Noah's funeral. For an instant, she was just a woman. And he was just a man. But the instant passed, and Julian backed away. He took a step back, like someone waking up from a dream they shouldn't have dreamed. "I'm sorry," he murmured. "This shouldn't have happened." "Shouldn't it?" Clara asked, her voice breaking. "Because you feel too much, or because you feel nothing?" He didn't answer. He looked at her as if he no longer knew who he was, as if he were facing something that disarmed him. "I can't love again," he said in a whisper. She nodded, tears burning in her eyes. "And I can't be a consolation. Not for you, not for anyone." The next morning she packed her bags. She carefully folded Leo's blanket and left a simple note on the dresser. "I'm not leaving because I want to. I'm leaving because I deserve to be chosen, not tolerated." She left without a sound, without saying goodbye. She knew if she looked back, she wouldn't be able to leave. For weeks she avoided any calls. She rejected messages. She asked her sister for a room, and though under judgmental glances, she stayed. She didn't want her daughter to be born there. But she had nowhere else to go. The birth came early, alone, on a suffocating morning, with pains cutting through her back and her body crumbling between tears and strength. She called an ambulance, but Lily arrived first. In a cold public hospital room, among hurried nurses and old equipment, her daughter was born. Small, but strong. Just like her. When she held Lily for the first time, she cried like she hadn't cried since Noah. Because there was love there was a new opportunity, and there was a certainty that even if she was alone, she wasn't empty. The second night, she heard his name at the reception desk. Julian. She didn't see him. She didn't want to see him. She asked not to be disturbed. She sent a message saying she was fine, that she didn't need anything. But her heart pounded like never before, because a part of her still loved him. But loving wasn't enough. He left flowers. A note. "I want to see you. I want to see our daughter." She tore up the note, but kept the flowers. Why did a part of her still have doubts? What if that kiss wasn't a mistake, but a beginning? But Lily, now, was the priority. She was the one who mattered. She was the one who needed a whole mother. And Clara had promised herself she would never fade for anyone again. That night, she looked out the window and whispered into the darkness, "If he really wants to be here, he's going to have to fight for it." And for the first time in a long time, she slept in peace. Although her chest was tight, there was something inside her that had already been reborn, something that no longer depended on anyone to move forward. What will Julian do now that Clara has left and had her baby? Will he fight for her? Tell us your thoughts below. A new start, a new family. The days that followed were silent. Julian didn't return to the hospital. Not to the room, not to the reception. He left no more notes, no flowers, no messages. It was as if he had understood what Clara needed. Distance. But instead of relief, that left a bitter taste in her mouth, as if something important had been interrupted before it reached the last page. Clara left the hospital with Lily in her arms, her body still sensitive from childbirth, and her soul trying to adapt to the weight of the new world she was carrying. The baby was small, but strong. Her dark eyes seemed to hold time itself, holding everything inside. The past, the pain, the unspoken story between the two of them. It was impossible to look at her without thinking of Julian, not because of blood, but because of his absence. Her sister's house seemed even smaller. Mike no longer hid his impatience. Denise, caught between helping and judging, did what she could. But there was little space there for a dignified start. Clara tried to look for rooms to rent, jobs she could do with Lily nearby, and even thought about going back to her old town. But something stopped her, as if time had not yet allowed that story to end. Meanwhile, in the mansion, time had stopped in a different way. Leo went days without talking. He would sit on the edge of the stairs, waiting, sometimes in the morning, sometimes in the afternoon. He believed, with the unbreakable faith of children, that Clara would come back. Julian, for his part, was on autopilot. He would go to the office, but he wouldn't read reports. He would attend meetings, but he would leave in the middle. Clarice said he would wake up at dawn and walk through the house like a ghost. Not out of nostalgia, out of emptiness. He was an incomplete man, and now he knew it. One afternoon, when the sky threatened rain, he went up to Leo's room and sat on the floor. The boy was drawing with crayons on a piece of paper. Simple, clumsy drawings, but full of meaning. Julian recognized a female figure with long hair, holding something in her arms. Next to her, Another smaller figure. The boy pointed to the drawing. "Mama," he whispered. Then he pointed to the baby. "Lul." Julian felt a knot in his throat. "Do you want to see them?" Leo nodded, without hesitation. Julian got up at that very moment. He grabbed his keys, put the boy in the back seat of the car, and left without looking at the clock. He didn't know exactly where to go. He only knew he needed to find her. He searched in known places, called the few contacts he had. He knocked door after door. With every "we haven't seen her," he felt time slipping through his fingers like sand. Until a neighbor of Denise, recognizing the luxurious car parked in front of the modest curb, pointed. "She's right there, second house on the left, but I don't think she wants to be disturbed." Julian stopped in front of the modest house. He took a deep breath. His heart was beating so fast it felt like a drum in his chest. Leo was sleeping in the back seat, exhausted. He got out slowly. He went up the 2 porch steps and rang the doorbell. Time stretched. When Clara opened the door, it was as if the air around her broke. Her hair was pulled back carelessly. Her blouse was stained with milk. Her eyes were sunken. But she was alive. Strong. A raw strength, built by hand. And more beautiful than ever. Julian stood motionless for a second. He began, but his voice failed him. He took a deep breath and tried again. "I know I have no right to be here, but I need to say something. Not for me, for you." She didn't respond. She just looked at him. There was hardness on her face, but also a silent curiosity. "I was wrong. When I kissed you and ran, it wasn't because I didn't feel anything. It was because I felt too much. I thought I couldn't love again. But the truth is that loving you made me afraid, because it made me want to live again. And living after so much pain also hurts." Clara pressed her hand against the doorframe. Her throat was burning. "And you think that's enough? That coming here and saying that changes what happened?" "No," he replied, with sincerity. "It doesn't change anything. But let me try to do it differently. Let me get to know Lily. Let me get to know you now with her. Not as a boss, not as a broken man, but as someone who wants to build. Slowly. For real." Then, a baby's cry filled the air. Clara looked over her shoulder. Lily was waking up. And Leo, in the car, opened his eyes and called out, "Mama!" Julian turned to his son, then looked back at her. "He dreams about you every night. He calls for you. He doesn't talk to anyone. Only when he draws you with Lily." She felt her legs weaken. "Why now, Julian?" "Because only now did I have the courage to admit that what I felt with you wasn't a consolation. It was a beginning." The silence between them was broken by the soft footsteps of Leo, who ran to her and hugged her legs. Clara knelt, hugging the child to her. Her eyes were full of tears. Then she stood up. She went inside, and came back minutes later with Lily wrapped in a blanket. Julian held out his arms. She hesitated, but she handed her over. He held her carefully, with reverence, like someone touching the world for the first time. His eyes filled with tears. His mouth trembled. Lily, small, looked at him with those dark eyes that seemed like mirrors of everything he had been, and everything he could still be. "She has your way of looking," he said. Clara smiled, but it was a slow, cautious smile. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was an opening. "You know this isn't going to be easy, right?" "I know," he replied, "but easy is never worth it." She looked at him for another moment. Then she knelt and took Leo's hand. "Do you want to go for a walk?" He nodded. Julian followed. Together, they went for a walk on the simple sidewalk under an orange sunset sky. Without promises, without guarantees, but with the courage that only those who have already lost everything have. the courage to start over. This time, together, as a family. Not perfect, but possible. What do you think their next challenge will be? What will their life be like now? Tell us what you think. A home built on love. The iron gate, which once opened to silence, now gave way to laughter. The mansion was no longer the same. The walls, once austere, had acquired warmer tones, children's drawings, and flowers on the sills. The main living room, which was once as cold as a luxury hospital waiting room, now breathed life. Toys on the floor, colorful rugs, and the constant aroma of freshly baked pie coming from the kitchen. In the garden, the flowers had grown back, and with them, everything else. Clara crossed the hallway with Lily in her arms, the girl's feet dangling in the air, trying to reach for the leaves coming in through the open gallery. Leo ran ahead in his dinosaur costume, laughing loudly, his eyes shining as if there was no trace left of the boy who one day refused to speak. Julian was waiting for them on the back gallery, sitting on the same wooden bench that months ago he had used to think about giving up. Now, it was there that time stood still in a good way. It was there that he watched life happen, without fear, without running away. The house was no longer a monument to loss. It was a home. He stood up when Clara approached. He took Lily naturally, kissed her forehead, and then lifted Leo in his arms, spinning him in the air with a laugh he never imagined he would have again. And when he put him down on the floor, Leo looked at Clara and said, "Mommy, this house now smells like Sunday." She smiled, and so did Julian. "It smells like Sunday?" she asked, mused. "Yes, just like when there's pie, laughter, and a blanket on the couch," he replied, with the poetic wisdom that only children know how to have. Julian pulled Clara to him by her waist. The embrace between them was no longer hesitant. It was complete. It was theirs. And in that rebuilt home, with scars in plain sight and love spread throughout every corner, there was room for everything. For memories, for beginnings, for what was, and for what was to come. The mansion was still big, but now it was full. Full of color, full of sounds, full of life, and for the first time, fully alive. If this story touched your heart, share it to spread a message of hope and redemption. And don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss our next story.